There is a power within each of us that is waiting to be discovered, a power that speaks not through words but through quiet. God, the source of all wisdom, teaches us that silence is not emptiness, it is the presence of the divine made real within us. When we truly stop, when we allow ourselves to be still, something remarkable happens. The mind, which is often restless and noisy, begins to quiet, and the heart opens to a greater awareness. In silence, we find a place of refuge from the endless demands of the world. The voice of God is always present, but it is subtle, gentle, and easily drowned out by the clamor of daily life. Only in stillness can we hear it clearly. This silence is not just an absence of sound, but the presence of God becoming tangible within us. Through silence, inner peace is not something we seek outside, it is something that is revealed within. We learn to detach from the turbulence of external events and the endless chatter of the mind. We see that all our fears, all our doubts, lose their hold when faced with the quiet power of God's presence. And in that awareness we are transformed. The practice of silence awakens us spiritually. It is a gentle but powerful teacher, guiding us to recognize that God is always with us, always speaking to us, and always present in the stillness of our being. It is through silence that our consciousness expands, and we begin to live in harmony with a deeper truth. As we embrace this discipline, we begin to experience life differently. Decisions become clearer, relationships are transformed, and the restless mind finds rest. Silence becomes not merely a practice, but a way of life, a constant connection to the divine within, a source of infinite peace and spiritual awakening. So let us not fear silence, but welcome it. Let us not rush past it in our business, but sit with it, breathe with it, and listen. For in silence, God teaches us the greatest lesson of all, that true power, true wisdom, and true peace are found not in what we say or do, but in what we allow ourselves to receive. Silence is the doorway to God, the path to inner peace and the awakening of the soul, and in that sacred stillness we find everything we have been seeking. Silence is more than the absence of sound, it is a profound doorway through which the presence of God becomes tangible in our lives. When the mind is quiet, when the endless chatter of thoughts, opinions, and distractions subsides, a space is created where the subtle voice of the divine can be heard. Most people live their lives immersed in noise, noise of the world, noise of the mind, and noise of emotion, never realizing that in every moment God is speaking, guiding, and revealing truths beyond human comprehension. In silence, we step away from the constant stream of activity and allow ourselves to enter a state of receptivity. It is in this stillness that the divine presence can communicate directly with the soul, unfiltered by the distortions of thought or desire. Silence is not passive, it is an active presence. It requires awareness, attention, and surrender. As we cultivate silence, we are not merely refraining from speech or external activity, we are intentionally creating a sacred space within where God can manifest. In this sacred space, the heart becomes sensitive to the unseen and the unheard, and we begin to recognize that the power of God has always been present, patiently waiting for us to notice it. The world often teaches us to look outward for answers, to seek guidance in external circumstances, or to trust only what can be measured and proven. Yet the truth of God's presence is always internal, always immediate, and always accessible through quiet attention. When we embrace silence, we begin to perceive life differently. Ordinary events take on a depth and clarity that were previously hidden, and challenges are seen not as obstacles, but as opportunities to witness the guidance and support of the divine. Silence sharpens our perception and refines our consciousness, making us aware of subtleties that are easily overlooked when the mind is cluttered with noise. In this quiet state, the ego loses its dominance, and the soul is free to recognize its connection to God. We realize that God is not distant or unreachable, rather God is present in every thought, every breath, and every moment of awareness. The practice of silence teaches patience, humility, and trust. It reminds us that the answers we seek are not always found in action or words, but in stillness, in the willingness to listen deeply, and in the surrender to a presence greater than ourselves. As we enter silence, we are gradually transformed. The noise that once dictated our emotions, decisions, and perceptions fades, and in its place arises clarity, insight, and an unshakable sense of inner guidance. It is through silence that we come to understand that God has always been teaching us, always speaking to us, but that the lessons are often drowned out until we choose to be still and listen. Silence, therefore, is not merely a pause in activity, it is the sacred gateway through which the divine enters, teaches, and awakens the soul. Inner peace is not something we find by seeking externally or by trying to control circumstances. It is discovered in the quiet, unshakable stillness of the soul. In a world that constantly demands attention, action, and reaction, the mind is often restless, moving from thought to thought, worry to worry, and desire to desire. Yet when we consciously step into stillness, a remarkable transformation begins to occur. Stillness is more than simply being motionless, it is a state of complete presence, a surrender of the need to manipulate or influence the outer world. In this stillness, we are no longer caught in the turbulence of fear, anger, or doubt. The heart slows, the mind settles, and a deep sense of calm arises, not from effort or willpower, but from allowing ourselves to simply be in the presence of God. This calm is not dependent on circumstances. Whether the world is chaotic or serene, whether challenges are pressing or distant, inner peace becomes available whenever we choose to enter this sacred space of stillness. It is in these moments that we realize peace is not a reward for action, but a state of awareness, a reflection of our connection to the infinite. When we are still, we become attuned to a deeper rhythm that exists beneath the surface of daily life. Thoughts and emotions continue to flow, yet they no longer control us. We begin to perceive life from a higher perspective, seeing situations as transient and recognizing the enduring presence of the divine within. Stillness also allows the heart to expand. In the absence of distraction, love, compassion, and understanding emerge naturally, because there is space for them to grow. The restlessness of the mind, which often leads to conflict or discontent, dissolves, and in its place arises clarity, patience, and wisdom. The practice of stillness is not about escaping life, but about engaging with it more fully. In moments of quiet reflection, we discover that the answers we seek, the guidance we long for, and the sense of wholeness we desire have always been present within us, patiently waiting for attention. Stillness teaches us trust. It teaches us that life is not about constant striving, but about allowing the divine to work through us and around us. Each time we embrace stillness, even for a few moments, we are reminded that true peace is not an achievement, but a natural state of being when we align with the source of all life. As we cultivate this practice, the inner turbulence gradually fades, and the soul begins to rest in its own natural harmony. The noise of the world may continue, but it no longer penetrates the sanctuary of quiet that we have learned to carry within us. In stillness, the soul awakens, the heart softens, and a profound sense of serenity becomes the foundation of every experience, revealing that inner peace is not something to chase, but something to remember and live moment by moment. Detachment from external noise is a necessary step in the journey towards spiritual awakening and inner peace, because the world constantly bombards us with distractions, opinions, and demands that pull us away from the quiet presence of God within. From the moment we wake, we are confronted with voices, images, and influences that stimulate the mind and provoke reactions, and without conscious effort, we allow these external forces to shape our thoughts, emotions, and even our sense of self. To be detached from this noise does not mean ignoring the world or withdrawing from life, but rather cultivating a clarity and stability that is not swayed by what occurs outside. When we practice detachment, we create an inner space that is untouched by the chaos around us, a space where the soul can recognize its own truth and the quiet guidance of the divine. This detachment is not an act of resistance, but a gentle letting go, a refusal to be pulled into every distraction, argument, or emotional disturbance that arises. In learning to separate ourselves from external noise, we begin to understand that true wisdom and guidance do not come from the clamor of the world, from the endless opinions of others, or from the changing circumstances of life, but from the still, silent presence that resides within each of us. The process of detachment strengthens our ability to listen deeply, not only to our own intuition, but to the subtle promptings of God that are always present, yet often overlooked in the midst of worldly clamor. As we grow in this practice, the mind becomes less reactive, and we no longer feel compelled to respond to every situation with anxiety, anger, or fear. We observe life with a gentle awareness, recognizing that while events occur around us, they do not define our inner state, nor do they dictate our spiritual progress. Detachment from external noise also allows the heart to open more fully, because when the mind is no longer dominated by distraction, there is room for love, compassion, and understanding to flow freely. We realize that peace, clarity, and joy are not dependent on what happens outside, but on our connection to the divine source within. In this state, even challenging circumstances can be met with calm and wisdom, because our inner equilibrium is not fragile, but grounded in something eternal and unshakable. Detachment is a form of freedom, a liberation from the constant pull of the senses and the opinions of others. It enables us to act from a place of divine guidance rather than impulse, to speak from truth rather than reaction, and to live from presence rather than fear. The more we practice this detachment, the more we discover that the noise of the world, while ever present, no longer has power over our consciousness, and that our awareness can remain centered, peaceful, and attuned to the voice of God at all times. Awareness of the divine presence is the cornerstone of spiritual awakening, because it shifts our perception from seeing life as a series of random events to recognizing that every moment is infused with the guidance, love, and intelligence of God. Most people move through life without truly noticing this presence, distracted by thoughts of the past, worries about the future, or the endless noise of the world around them. Yet when we cultivate awareness, we begin to realize that God is not distant or separate from us. God is the very essence of our being, present in every breath, in every thought, and in every experience we encounter. This awareness is not something we create through effort alone. It is cultivated through stillness, attention, and a willingness to notice what is always already there. When the mind quiets and the heart opens, the divine presence becomes unmistakable, revealing itself in subtle ways, a gentle insight, a feeling of peace, a sense of guidance, or even in the simple beauty of a moment that touches the soul. As we become more attuned to this awareness, life itself begins to change. Challenges that once seemed overwhelming are now seen through a lens of trust, for we understand that the divine is not absent in difficulty, but present within it, guiding, teaching, and sustaining us at every step. Awareness of the divine presence also dissolves the illusion of separation. We recognize that we are not isolated individuals navigating a chaotic world, but expressions of a greater, eternal reality in which God operates through all things. Every interaction, every event, and every experience becomes a potential doorway to connection, a reminder of the intelligence and love that underlies existence. This awareness is not intellectual, it is experiential. It is felt in the quiet knowing that we are held, guided, and supported by a presence far greater than our own understanding. As this consciousness deepens, we find that we no longer rely solely on external validation or circumstances to feel secure, for our sense of being is anchored in the unchanging reality of God within. The mind becomes a receptive instrument rather than a restless projector, and the heart is no longer burdened by fear or doubt. Instead, we live with a growing trust, a clarity of purpose, and a recognition that everything unfolds in harmony with the divine order. Awareness of the divine presence transforms ordinary life into sacred experience, teaching us that there is meaning, intelligence, and care in every moment, even those that appear difficult or confusing. It nurtures gratitude, humility, and compassion, because when we see God in all things, we cannot separate ourselves from the sacredness of others or the world around us. This awareness is a continuous practice, a gentle turning inward to notice what is always present yet often overlooked. Each time we pause, listen, and open to this presence, our spiritual consciousness expands, and the ordinary becomes extraordinary as we live more fully in the light of the divine within us. The transformation of the mind is one of the most profound experiences on the path of spiritual awakening, because the mind shapes not only our perception of the world, but also our experience of life itself. Most of the unrest, fear, and confusion that people experience arises from habitual patterns of thought, conditioned beliefs, and the constant activity of the intellect attempting to control and predict reality. These mental patterns often create illusions of limitation, scarcity, or separation, keeping the soul from realizing its true nature and its connection to God. Transformation begins when we recognize that the mind is not the source of ultimate truth, but a tool through which we can perceive the deeper reality that exists beyond thought. When we allow silence, stillness, and awareness of the divine presence to permeate our consciousness, the mind begins to shift. The old patterns of fear, doubt, and judgment gradually lose their power because they are no longer reinforced by constant attention and energy. Instead, new patterns emerge, patterns of clarity, trust, and alignment with the higher intelligence that governs all life. This transformation is not sudden, but a gradual unfolding as we learn to release control and surrender to the divine guidance that is always available. As the mind is transformed, we begin to see life from a higher perspective. Situations that once triggered anxiety, anger, or despair are now perceived through the lens of wisdom and understanding. We realize that challenges are not threats, but opportunities for growth and deeper alignment with the divine. The thought processes themselves become more harmonious, flowing naturally rather than being forced or chaotic, and decisions arise not from fear or ego, but from insight and intuition rooted in spiritual awareness. This transformation also affects the way we relate to others. When the mind is no longer dominated by judgment, comparison, or negativity, our interactions are infused with patience, empathy, and compassion. We begin to understand that every individual is also an expression of the divine, and our responses become less reactive and more reflective of the love and intelligence that underlies all existence. The transformation of the mind is deeply connected to the recognition that we are not separate from God or from life itself. As the mind opens to this understanding, it becomes a receptive instrument for higher consciousness rather than a battleground for conflicting thoughts and emotions. Habits of worry, criticism, and self-doubt dissolve, replaced by a sense of inner freedom and creative clarity. The mind becomes a channel through which divine wisdom can flow into every aspect of life, guiding actions, choices, and perspectives with grace and precision. Through this ongoing process, the mental landscape is purified, and we experience a remarkable alignment between thought, feeling, and spiritual insight, revealing that the transformation of the mind is not merely an intellectual change, but a profound spiritual awakening that touches every layer of our being and opens the door to lasting peace, harmony, and understanding. Practical spiritual exercise is the bridge between understanding spiritual truths and experiencing them directly in daily life, because awareness alone is not enough unless it is actively engaged and applied. Many people study spiritual principles, read sacred texts, or contemplate the nature of God, yet without practice, these insights remain abstract and disconnected from their lived reality. A practical spiritual exercise involves intentionally setting aside time and space to connect with the divine, to cultivate inner silence, and to allow the presence of God to work through the mind, heart, and body. This practice can take many forms, but at its core, it is a disciplined act of attention, a conscious choice to turn inward and recognize the reality that is always available beyond the surface of thoughts and appearances. Regular engagement in such exercises trains the mind to settle, the heart to open, and the soul to become receptive to higher guidance. Through repetition and consistency, the practice moves beyond a mere ritual and becomes a natural way of living, an ever-present alignment with the divine flow. One of the most powerful aspects of a practical spiritual exercise is that it teaches us to respond rather than react, to act from insight rather than impulse. When the mind has been quieted and the soul has been attuned through disciplined practice, we begin to notice the subtle promptings of God in our daily decisions, interactions, and actions. The exercise fosters awareness of the unseen currents of life, the guidance that is always present but often overlooked when the mind is scattered or preoccupied. Through this conscious engagement, we begin to experience transformation at every level. Thoughts that once dominated us with fear, doubt, or negativity are replaced by clarity, trust, and inspiration. Emotions that were unstable or reactive become balanced, and our perception of life itself shifts toward harmony and grace. Practical spiritual exercise also strengthens faith. The repeated experience of connecting with the divine through stillness, meditation, prayer, or mindful attention builds confidence in the unseen reality, showing us that God's presence is reliable, constant, and accessible at all times. Over time, the benefits of this practice extend beyond the periods of formal exercise into every moment of life. The principles learned in quiet reflection begin to guide our interactions, our decisions, and our perspective on challenges. We notice that peace, insight, and wisdom are no longer dependent on external circumstances, but arise naturally from our inner alignment with the divine. This disciplined engagement also nurtures patience and humility, as we learn that spiritual growth is a gradual unfolding rather than an instantaneous achievement. By incorporating practical spiritual exercises into daily life, we train ourselves to live in a state of continuous awareness, maintaining connection with God even amidst activity, noise, and distraction. It becomes evident that these exercises are not separate from life, but are life itself lived consciously, moment by moment, guided by the quiet, powerful, and transformative presence of the divine within and around us. When we embrace silence, stillness, detachment, awareness, transformation, and spiritual practice, we discover that the journey inward is the truest path to freedom, wisdom, and peace. Life does not need to be driven by noise, fear, or struggle, because the divine is always present, always guiding, and always available to us in the quiet of our hearts. By turning inward, listening deeply, and allowing God to work through us, we awaken to a life of harmony, clarity, and inner joy. The power of silence is not merely a practice, it is a doorway to spiritual awakening, a reminder that everything we have been seeking outside has always been within. In the stillness of the soul, we find the presence, the guidance, and the peace that transforms every thought, every moment, and every experience into a reflection of divine love.